Tensions grow in the South China Sea between U.S. and Chinese Navy. The U.S. Navy reminded China again, the South China Tensions grow in the South China Sea between U.S. and Chinese Navy. The U.S. Navy reminded China again, the South China Sea is open to navigation as it sent destroyer USS Barry 12 miles offshore of the disputed Paracel Islands. China's official media says that nation's military sent the American ship packing. The U.S. Navy said the Barry simply had made its point and kept on sailing. The Barry is based in Japan, but could future Navy moves in the South China Sea involve ships based in Washington state? The South China Sea, bordered principally by China, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines, has been the home of a sort of Cold War between the US and allies for years. Those allies include Japan and Australia pushing back at China, which asserts that the big body of water belongs to it. The South China Sea hosts some of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and major reserves of oil and gas are believed to exist underneath it, just waiting to be tapped once prices improve. This is the fourth or fifth U.S. freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea this year, said David Bachman, the Henry M. Jackson Professor of International Studies at the University of Washington. An expert on China and its politics, Bachman says tensions are building, and the current state of the world economy and President Donald Trump's current drive to blame China for the coronavirus pandemic are making things worse. This fits into the big picture for the United States of negative things going on in China. Certainly Hong Kong, certainly the South China Sea, obviously the arguments and fights about COVID-19, and, of course, we signed this trade deal on January 15 where it's quite clear that China won't be able to fulfill that trade deal, explained Bachman. Protests have flared up in Hong Kong again, as the central government under President Xi Jinping renews its push for laws that would force more control over the semi-autonomous region that was a British colony until 1997. Tensions are spreading around the region. The Chinese just sunk a Vietnamese fishing vessel. They continue to harass Malaysian oil exploration vessels. There's little doubt in my mind that the Chinese continue to push the envelope, said retired four-star U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, who lives in Washington state and is a military consultant and commentator for NBC News. I do not think they are actively considering confronting the U.S. Navy freedom of navigation exercises. There is a lot of posturing, said McCaffrey. They now have 27 military outposts in the Spratlys and the Paracel Islands. The Chinese have created a series of artificial islands complete with runways and harbors. McCaffrey doesn't think the U.S. will maintain an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea if a hot war ensues, because of the risk of shore-launched anti-ship missiles. But clearly the nation's carrier fleet, including the USS Theodore Roosevelt, are spending time there and sending messages. The Roosevelt making a visit to Vietnam in early March. The U.S. Navy bases two large carriers in Washington state that now include the USS Carl Vinson and the USS Nimitz. The Navy will only say that the Nimitz is currently deployed. The economic superpowers of the U.S. and China are intertwined. Washington is not only a major port that handles cargo heading into and out of the U.S., but China is also Boeing's biggest national customer for new aircraft and has even hosted China's President Xi in its factories. Professor Bachman says that economic relationship is at risk. We have a slow-motion effort to separate these two economies, said Bachman. It will be quite painful for both sides. Pentagon says China's military is challenging the U.S. with risky run-ins in the South China Sea during the pandemic. The Pentagon said the U.S. military has had unsafe encounters with the Chinese military in the South China Sea in recent months as the world battles the COVID-19 pandemic. The Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Southeast Asia told Fox News on Tuesday that there had been at least 9 concerning incidents involving Chinese fighters and U.S. aircraft over the contested waterway since mid-March. There was also an unsafe encounter involving a Chinese naval vessel and the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Mustin last month. The Pentagon said the U.S. military has had unsafe encounters with the Chinese armed forces in the South China Sea during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is also a source of deepening tension between the two countries. There have been at least 9 concerning incidents involving Chinese fighter jets and U.S. aircraft in the skies above the contested waterway since mid-March, Reed Werner, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Southeast Asia, told Fox News on Tuesday, adding that China continues to engage in risky and escalatory behavior. A defense official told Insider that some incidents were considered unsafe, though the specific details behind the incidents are unclear. Werner also told Fox News that a Chinese escort ship sailing with a Chinese aircraft carrier group maneuvered in an unsafe and unprofessional way near the U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer USS Mustin in the South China Sea last month. Chinese media reports indicated that a Chinese Navy flotilla led by the Liaoning was conducting mock battles in the South China Sea in April. Werner told Fox that the Pentagon found the current trend line very worrisome, adding that the U.S. has lodged several formal and informal complaints in response to recent incidents. "We've made démarches," he said, adding that this is a regular occurrence. Pentagon spokesman Lieutenant Col. Dave Eastburn said in a recent statement that the Department of Defense was concerned by increasing opportunistic activity by the PRC to coerce its neighbors and press its unlawful maritime claims in the South China Sea (SCS) while the region and the world is focused on addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. The Department of Defense has said that U.S. adversaries are trying to take advantage of the global situation, but has also stressed that the U.S. military remains ready to meet that challenge and defend U.S. interests. The U.S. military has increasingly sought to make its presence known in the South China Sea and the larger Indo-Pacific region, especially after the coronavirus sidelined the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. The coronavirus originated in China, and both countries have blamed each other, even going so far as to promote conspiracy theories. In recent months, U.S. Navy ships have conducted patrols and freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, as well as Taiwan Strait transits, and U.S. Air Force bombers have carried out patrols in the region. U.S. operations have continued since March. Navy vessels have conducted 3 freedom of navigation operations challenging China's territorial claims to the Paracel and Spratly Islands. U.S. ships carried out multiple presence operations near a South China Sea standoff. And Navy warships, including the large amphibious assault ship USS America, have conducted joint drills with other nations, and Air Force B-1B Lancers have carried out 2 strategic bomber patrols. Following a recent freedom of navigation operation, Senior Col. L.I. Waman, a spokesman for the People's Liberation Army's Southern Theater Command, said the U.S. should focus on fighting COVID-19 rather than conducting military operations. Tensions in the South China Sea, where the U.S. and Chinese militaries have had a number of unpleasant interactions over the years, come as the U.S. and China spar over the COVID-19 outbreak that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives worldwide. The Trump administration, which has come under a lot scrutiny for its handling of the coronavirus at home, has repeatedly criticized China's missteps, which the U.S. says caused a troubling problem that began in China and evolved into a global crisis.
正中，距离45公里。
上报3营东南方向有6平目标。105连，机动指照副延长。
这两层，看点射。